struggles,
innovation,
going all in,
not holding back,
mindset,
being a leader,
paving their own way,
putting the real in real estate,
listing legacies, selling luxury. You have The Vault.
unlocking conversations in real estate today.
We are live with The Vault. I'm your host, Jessica Hastings-Lesperance, and let me introduce my magical co-host, Alexa Miller. Who do we have on the show today?
Hi, everyone. Welcome back. I'm very excited to introduce today's guest, Matthew Patullo. Matthew is a partner at AP Romano Legal Professional Corp with offices in Vaughan and Bradford. He has been working in the industry for roughly 10 years, has been licensed for over 8 years, and has had his own practice for about 4 years. So welcome, Matthew. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, thanks for having me here today.
That's amazing. That is an incredible introduction as well. 8 years of business, 4 years on your own. This is amazing.
Yeah. So just start by telling us a bit about yourself and your background.
So I graduated from the University of Windsor in 2014. That's where I went for law school. From the get-go, I kind of knew I wanted to be involved in real estate law. So even throughout my articling and my focus on the practical side of things, as well as in the classes, I kind of shifted more towards that area of the law than others. And I guess just since then, it turned out to be as good as what I thought it would be, or at least as enjoyable for me. And so I just continued to focus mostly on that area, but we also do offer other services at our firm as well.
Very good. Awesome. So can you start by explaining what is a lawyer's job when representing both buyers and sellers?
Very good question.
Yeah, so it varies quite a bit. I mean, in the transactions where everything goes the way they're supposed to, it could be just a matter of guiding first-time home buyers through the process of the documents they're going to be signing, the terms of their mortgage, the implications of the way their names are being registered on title, the way their information is being entered, and just understanding their obligations, I guess, going forward as a homeowner on the buying side. On the selling side, for the most part, we're just going to be ensuring that anything that's on title is removed for the new buyers so that they're able to have title free and clear, basically, aside from any mortgages they're going to be registering themselves. But for the most part, in those types of transactions, it's a little bit easier because everything goes according to schedule. When the transactions don't go the way they're supposed to go, it could be anything for on the buyer's side, trying to get the buyers compensated for damage to the property if there was any damage that was done from the time that the person had contracted for the property up until the point where they have actually taken possession. Sometimes it involves negotiating extensions if the financing isn't ready for a buyer on time. And on the flip side, on the seller side, you're also trying to navigate whatever obstacles might be coming your way from the purchaser side, just kind of reversed.
Yeah. Well, there's always obstacles. And even, every deal is its own, really. And I'm sure it's the same with, being a lawyer and having your own practice.
Yeah.
I'm sure it's 360s every day, like us.
Yeah, well, that's the fun of it, right? Because it's not you're not getting the exact same thing every day, and no two deals are the same, nor are any two clients. So it's good because it kind of keeps you on your toes and gives you something new every day, right?
Yeah. And I love the experience. I love, this happened or that happened. And I always want to know what happened in the end. So I know going forward, I know how to manage that. Yeah.
Yeah. Learning opportunity. So I'm going to talk a little bit about a title search, which you briefly touched on, but for anyone listening that's a buyer or a real estate agent, a new real estate agent, can you explain what a title search entails and what it is?
Yeah, so usually when the title search is going to be conducted, it's usually when you're representing the purchaser. The seller kind of allows the purchaser to satisfy themselves, so they'll be pulling parcel, which is just basically the actual electronic registered form of title ownership that you have. And so when we pull that on the lawyer's end, We basically get to see the chain of ownership. It shows any previous owners, or at least for the most part, from any time that it was converted into the land title system instead of registry. And so you'll get to see who owned the property. You get to see what mortgages are on the property. You get to see if there's any other instruments of concern. So sometimes there's things like certificate of pending litigation, or all these other, I guess, more complicated things. I won't get too much into it, but things that basically have to be removed from title. And so the reason why we do this is because the idea is the purchaser is supposed to be buying title without any of these things that would cloud title. And so we discover what they are, and we work with the seller's lawyer to get them removed so that our client gets to have property free and clear. So when they go to sell in the future, there won't be any issues for them to do that.
Yeah. What would you say would be the number one thing you've noticed with title insurance that keeps coming up, maybe with realtors or clients? Like, is there any consistent questions or things that people aren't aware of?
Good question.
Well, in title insurance, the one thing that causes issues sometimes are when people are signing under a power of attorney. That's what I find. It's not that it's an issue necessarily, but it's just that they have a heightened level of scrutiny because there are certain things that title insurance companies will look for, especially because fraud seems to be on the rise. And so lawyers and title insurance companies alike, as well as the realtors, were all kind of working together to try to prevent that, or at least, put in as many fail safes as possible so that it makes it either very hard or impossible to commit frauds.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's important.
Can you briefly explain to our listeners what title insurance is?
Yeah, so title insurance, it kind of came about, I believe, early 2000s or thereabouts, or at least it became prominent then. And historically, what lawyers would do is they would have to, prior to closing, they'd have to seek tax certificates, get bylaw clearance to make sure there's no bylaw infringements on the property. They'd have to get final utility readings, and all these things would cost money and time. So whoever came up with title insurance, the idea was, rather than pulling all these searches and having a lawyer bill at their hourly rate, you just insure against them. So what title insurance does is it protects the buyer in the event that someone later tries to commit fraud under their name. It protects the bank in case the buyer wasn't who they said they were and the bank would get frauded. It's depends on the policies, because different companies will have different nuances with the extent of their coverage and everything, but it will also protect you if the seller didn't pay the taxes the way they said they did in the statement of adjustments. The same with the utilities or anything like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's super important.
And it's, as far as I understand, it's not required in Ontario, but it's recommended.
Mm-hmm.
It's,
oh gosh,
it's not expensive.
It's not required, but some of the banks will
Right.
require it. So if you're buying it property free and clear, there's not necessarily a reason to put it on, but I would say 99.9% of the transactions I've seen, people use it. So
Yeah,
I
always
wouldn't imagine
recommend
not.
it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm the same.
Even
I'm
though I'm
just
not a
like
lawyer.
cringing, thinking, "Oh my god!"
Yeah,
Like what? Like think of all the things that could come up.
yeah,
And you always think, yeah, it's free and clear. But I know there's been circumstances where no, we found this weird thing, and there's an easement or there's a shoreline road allowance. Or
yeah. And correct me if I'm wrong, but there's been instances where property boundary issues come up, and title insurance sometimes can help with that as well.
yeah, so it depends on the company and the policy, because each one of them have their own carve outs and everything, but some companies do cover that. So it's really a matter of the limitations of that company. But yeah, I personally, even for my own personal transactions, I always get it. I've got a vacant lot once for $9,000, and I still title insured it just because I seen what can happen.
Yeah, well, exactly. Better safe than sorry.
it's important.
Yeah.
So what is something us realtors can do when we're drafting an agreement of purchase and sale? What is something we can do to make the lawyer's job a little bit easier, if anything?
Well, I mean, realistically, communication is always good. If there's a unique clause or something that's out of the ordinary in a transaction, if a realtor is able to kind of identify that just to bring the lawyer's attention to it. It saves a lot of time, rather than, scouring over the entire agreement when a lot of the times, some of the standard clauses are not necessarily something that a lawyer would have to review. But just if a realtor were to give a heads up and say something like, this deal is different because of this, or we have a special clause, or this deal is going to work out differently like this, at least the lawyer will know where to divert their attention to, and they could be a lot more efficient with, seeing if everything is good on that front.
Yeah. Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about lawyer review? Sometimes I feel there's mixed, expectations or perceptions of what really does that entail on APS.
Yeah, the condition of the lawyer review. Yeah.
Yeah, well, for the most part, in my experience anyways, a lot of the times by the time I get a deal on a resale, it's already been firmed up. The only time that I'm usually reviewing a resale agreement prior to it being firmed up is if there's a unique circumstance or some kind of encumbrance on title that, the realtor's flagged as, let the lawyer review this first before we commit to this transaction. Where lawyer review happens more with the agreements and all that will either be status certificate reviews prior to the purchase of a condo, or pre-construction agreements during the 10-day cooling period.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense.
Right. Sometimes I'll throw in like if I pull up the legal description and I see that there's some sort of easement or something like that on title and I'm not comfortable with it or I don't understand it, I'll recommend to my clients that I put in a condition for their lawyer to review it just to protect them. And typically there's not much to it, but I just like to, the protection is huge in that sense for the client. So
I think that makes a lot of sense. I think it's good that you do that because it's as simple as then flipping it over to the lawyer and the lawyer can just say, yeah, you're good to go, or we should recommend they remove it or anything like that.
Yeah,
Right.
it's a fiduciary duty to protect the best interests of the client. So absolutely. Is there anything that you would describe that is a frustration that you find with realtors when you're managing businesses and clients with them?
good question. Tell
I'm
us.
sure there is.
Be honest.
Yeah, like yours laugh.
I mean, it depends, right? I think the one thing, well, for the most part, it's not that much of an issue. I just think the one thing is sometimes on closing day, if a client enters a property and the property is not in a condition that that they expected, I know everybody likes to rely on the broom swept clause condition. And so what I do tell realtors that I work with is we will go to bat for the client and we'll ask that either something be done to remedy the situation or some kind of compensation to the client depending on how bad the damage is. But I also caution them that once the deal has closed, the client has to decide if they want to go forward and sue the person for the extent of the damage and if it's worth it for them, because I do let them know contractually, yes, they have an obligation to deliver the property to you in a clean condition, in the condition that you contracted for. So that might have been 2 or 3 months before the actual closing date. But I also just ask that they can try to kind of set the expectations, because if there's just a little bit of dirt on the counter, it might not be worth suing. And oftentimes the other lawyer will just ignore us when we do send out the information to them. So
yeah, we've been there. Like we've done dump runs. I've helped load trailers and tractors and cleaned and
I had a deal recently where I did my best to ensure, as per the contract, everything was gone that needed to be gone. It was a divorce situation. There was stuff left that I, at the end of the day, couldn't deal with myself. So I called the seller's lawyer. I was representing the seller and I just gave them a heads up. I'm like, there is probably going to be some issues with this. Just letting you know. And they seemed to appreciate that. So, and it worked out, it closed.
Oh, that's good. That's good, at least.
Yeah. So another quick question. Is it kind of normal that when a deal closes that the lawyer often calls the realtor to let them know it closes? Sometimes I find we're in limbo and we either get a call or sometimes we don't. So I was wondering what is kind of, across the board, how you manage that?
So realistically, it's more on specific circumstances. Some people want to be contacted Like there's some of the realtors want to be contacted. Like the client will always get contacted. We'll send out an email. But if a realtor specifically requests, hey, can you just put us on the chain? We'll include them in the email if they want to be, or alternatively, sometimes a realtor will just call after saying, hey, did everything go smooth? We say, yeah, we're going to close in about 30, 45 minutes. We're just doing the banking. You say, okay, great. And then everybody's kind of on the same page. So it kind of varies. It just depends on what each realtor wants, I guess. Right.
Yeah, that's good because we've had clients go to a property when we didn't know it didn't close.
Oh, well,
Right?
Yeah, I've never had that, thankfully.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what would you say your biggest successes in your business would be?
Well, I mean, first and foremost, starting a business, I think for anybody who starts any business is a success in and of itself. Just because it's a real adjustment. When you're used to working a job, every 2 weeks, you know what you're going to get paid, you know what your bills are, you can kind of budget. And when you go at first and you start in your own practice or your own business or anything really, it's kind of an adjustment because you think, okay, well, my bills are still coming in every month, but how do I know how much money I'm going to make each month, right? Um, but then once you get into it and you start, I guess believing in yourself, and if you offer a good product, you can start seeing, the fruits of your labor in the sense that it's a different lifestyle, and you definitely have to be some degree of a self-starter. It's not for everybody. But that being said, I think that's definitely something that I think anyone who's gone off and started their own business should be proud of.
Absolutely. 100% I agree. It's incredible. It's massive. It's this huge thing, especially with the law. Like how many years? 8 years. How many years of school is that? 7, 8?
Oh, well, undergrad was supposed to be 4, but the school I was at went on strike, so it stretched out another year. I took a year off to save up money to pay for law school because it's not cheap, and then 3 years of actual law school and 1 year of articling after that.
Yeah. So like that is a long commitment, right? You put some things on pause in your life. I had to do that with my school too, because it's your drive, it's what you want. But in the long run, it's worth it.
Yeah, very true. This is kind of a big question. But what are some of the biggest things realtors need to look out for when protecting their clients in a real estate purchase or sale? Just some examples.
Well, if you're representing the buyer, let's say, for example, I definitely caution people in terms of buying a property without conditions. Um, I know a while back when the market was a little bit crazy, it was the only way people could get properties in Toronto or the GTA. But then you hear some horror stories. Some people would have gone in with no conditions, and then they close the transaction and they discover there's a crack in the foundation, or there's something else that requires, remedying after the fact. It's important that people, obviously, if you don't have a choice and you have to go in with no conditions, just be aware of the risks. But obviously, very important that you do get someone professional to inspect the property to protect your interests. The other thing too, obviously, again, is the financing. Some people think a pre-approval is gold, even in pre-construction transactions where it would be 2 years before. Definitely make sure the financing is in place, because if it's not, the costs of not being able to close on time can be quite significant depending on how much longer they need, and even if the seller's willing to entertain an extension.
Yeah.
Um,
It's
you
so
know,
important, right? Like
Yeah.
I know for us, we get them to fill out a form if we think they shouldn't go, and they want to go no conditions. We get them to acknowledge in some way, shape, or form that, yep, we advise them and they're going against what we're advising them and they're
Yeah.
going in.
It's funny because as a seller's agent and we get a firm offer, of course, it's the best type of offer to receive.
Yeah.
But as a buyer's agent, it's the scariest type of offer to draft
Yeah.
because risk
Yeah.
involved with it. It's great if it sells firm quickly. It's, essentially an easy sale, but you have to really reiterate to them the risk of it. And we recommend, of course, talking to a lawyer before signing off on a firm offer. And not many do, unfortunately,
Yeah.
but that's all we can do, right?
It's good. Yeah, it's just that excitement, right?
Yeah.
And it's, our due diligence to make sure that lawyer review, like do your due diligence, do the home inspection. Yeah,
Mhm.
there are ways. What would you say your biggest struggle is in your business?
Um, I think what's difficult again in most businesses is just trying to separate the operations and the business development, because when you're trying to do everything yourself, um, you can't divide yourself into 3 or 4 people, and there's not enough hours in a day. So it's really important, and I think I discovered this, that you get really good staff and you're able to effectively delegate the work that you're doing, because as much as some people think, well, I don't want to pay someone else to do this, you also limit your ability to take on more clients or to properly service the clients that you do have and everything. So I think it's definitely difficult to find good help, but when you do, you have to hold on to it, right? So
I agree.
Yeah,
It's
absolutely.
leverage, baby. We talk
Mhm.
about it all the time, right? Like, if that was the
yeah,
number one thing I would teach anybody is leverage, like the first day you start your business,
Yeah.
yeah,
right? It's working on the business and working in the business. And I have always found that struggle too. Like when Matthew was just talking about that, eventually we'll get there. So just holding that trust and going with the flow.
Yeah. Okay, a question that I've always had for lawyers. How many deals can you close in a day? Like, what does a closing
Yeah.
day look like for you for a deal? How many deals can you get done in one day?
well, it depends
I've
how
always wanted to
soon.
know.
Yeah. Because we're so
Yeah.
busy. Every time I call them, I'm like, I can't call you back.
I'm too busy.
It I think it's hard to put an exact number on it, because it depends when the deals are received too, right? If you get, I don't know, let's say 50 deals that are closing on the same day a month from now, it'll be a crazy closing day. But if you have enough lead up time to that, you can definitely get it done. If you're getting 50 deals the day before closing on all of them, it's probably not going to happen, right? And I've had that sometimes where clients forgot to get the lawyer involved, and you get a call saying, hey, I know today is August 1st, but we have a deal that we need to close on August 4th.
Oh
Can
my
you
gosh.
do it? The answer is yes, but if
Trouble.
50 people are doing that, no. So
Wow.
it's obviously on our end, the earlier we have it, the better, because then we can just kind of arrange our schedule accordingly, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So what does, for anyone listening, well, and for myself, like can you explain the process of closing out a deal um on both sides, whether you're representing the seller or the buyer?
Yeah, so I'll start with the buyer side, because there's usually more moving parts on that side. Typically for us, the process starts kind of once the realtor has sent us over the deal. And at that point, what we like to do is we like to get information from the client, just contact information, emails, anything like that. And we also like to find out who their bank or their mortgage broker is, just so that we can also basically have everything we need to begin communicating with everyone. And so we basically just advise the client that we'll be opening the file and we'll be gathering more information a little bit closer to closing. The other thing too that's important that we get at that stage is usually finding out who the seller's lawyer is, just because sometimes we don't get that, and sometimes it's hard to track it down after, if the realtor is hard to get a hang of or anything like that. But once we have that information, usually at that point there'll be a little bit of radio silence for the client, just because you can't really start your title searches until the requisition date, and you have to do it closer to the closing date. What will happen at that point, let's say about a week to closing, we'll begin either have the mortgage instructions already, or we'll be harassing the client to get their mortgage person to send it to us. And we'll be able to start putting together the file. So we'll be able to get an idea of how much money the client's going to need to bring in for closing. We're going to prepare the documents that have to be executed for the mortgage, for the transfer of title, things like that. And then we arrange signing with the client, which nowadays we can either do virtually, over Zoom or WhatsApp or any of the video platforms, or in person if some people still prefer that, or if the bank mandates that you have to do it in person. From that point on, the client will have delivered us the funds and signed the documents, and then we just wait on closing day for the bank to wire us the funds or deliver the funds to us. We then provide that to the seller's lawyer. Once the seller's lawyer confirms that we've paid enough to them, they release the deed, we register it, our client owns the property, their client gets the money, and the deal's completed at that point.
Awesome. Perfect. Well, thank you for taking us through that. Because we know as realtors kind of what the process is, but a lot of people don't. Now leading from that, I have another question because I ran into this recently with a deal. What happens if the bank doesn't get the money to you in time for closing? Like, so recently I had buyers, the money was lined up, but the bank almost didn't get them the funds in time and they almost couldn't close. And, to my understanding, that's putting the buyer at risk of breach of contract, but it's the bank's fault. Have you run into that? And what is the outcome?
Yeah, so technically the contract is between the buyer and the seller, right? So when that happens, depending on the nature of the transaction, depending if it's been extended already or not, we usually like to ask for an extension on behalf of the buyer. So the seller is only concerned about their contract with the buyer because they're the ones that have the contract. So more often than not, I find that sellers are willing to negotiate some kind of an extension if the bank is not ready to fund by a certain day. And at that point, the extension will usually come with costs. It might include extra legals for the seller's lawyer, per diems or interest for the existing mortgage that the seller has, or any other costs that they might incur as a result of this extension. So there'll be a cost. And then at that point, if the buyer feels that it's the bank's fault that the mortgage didn't fund on time, they can try to get recourse from the bank after on their own. But for us, it's our job to try to reach some kind of a compromise so the buyer doesn't lose their deposit or their ability to close this purchase.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering. I'm like, if they don't grant an extension, which it'd be kind of silly if they didn't, unless they have a buyer with cash right there ready to go. But which is rare. That doesn't really happen. So I just didn't know what the outcome was. If it's, like you said, it's between the seller and the buyer essentially, but what recourse does the buyer have with the bank is what my question was. So
they'd have to probably sue them, and then like a court would decide who was at fault, because there's so many moving parts that maybe the buyer was actually at fault, maybe they delayed getting documents to the bank or something like that, right? So it's very fact dependent, right?
Yeah, I have another question. So when I know we talk a lot about, sellers, lawyers, buyers, lawyers, obviously we need some healthy relationships with other lawyers who we work with, in the area and around. How do you feel when, one of your, maybe a main client who's a realtor kind of uses different lawyers? I know we do to support them and maintain different relationships. So what's your perspective on that?
At the end of the day, everyone is free to use anyone they want to use. For me, if I have a working relationship with realtors or mortgage agents or anyone like that, I understand that sometimes the client will go somewhere else, but I still try to provide support, in the form of if a question was to come up or a circumstance that they wanted to ask about. I still don't mind helping, but obviously, you like when you get the business and you like to be able to do it, but I think over time, if you provide a good enough product, the more and more of the clients will just kind of gravitate towards you, or more people send their files your way.
Yeah, I guess we find in our area where everyone's busy and we don't have as many
we only have so many options around here.
And everyone's jam-packed busy.
Well, I can imagine, but the beauty of it now anyways is with the virtual signings and all that, it's kind of easier to have a bigger outreach, right? So
me, for example, we're licensed in Ontario as realtors, but typically I stick to my area because that's what I know. Is that the same for lawyers, or do you just, like, if somebody called you from North Bay wanting you to close a deal, do you take anything on, or do you stick to your area, or how does that work with lawyers?
With lawyers, it's less about the area, because in Ontario, the underlying title search and all of that kind of stuff is somewhat the same regardless of where in Ontario you are, because we're under the same registry system.
Right.
So for us, we've had clients in North Bay, we've had clients in Windsor, we've had clients all over. It's less about the area. I think with realtors, it's more territorial like that, in the sense that you know, if you're more familiar with an area than a different realtor, then there's more you know, you'd have more knowledge specific to that area. But when it comes to the legal side of things, the law works the same no matter where the property is located.
Yeah, good point. That makes
Mhm.
sense.
Yeah, I love how you can go virtual, so you can just access so much more,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah,
Oh
it's
yeah,
huge.
yeah.
Mhm.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Matthew. This was a great episode. Thanks for all your insight and advice. For anybody that wants to contact you, where can we find you?
So usually for me, the best place to reach me is on my email. That's Patullo, MPAT as in Tom, ULLO at aprlawyers.ca.
Awesome.
Awesome. And we'll make sure to post all of your information in the bio.
Yep.
So thanks
Sounds
again,
good.
Matthew, and take care.
Thanks so much.
Okay.
Fun.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you. And that's the vault.